Every evening, I'd see him across our shared fence. 2 coffee mugs, one quiet smile, my neighbor, steady as sunset. I didn't know then that the soft rhythm of his footsteps would rewrite every room inside me, or that home would become a person standing 10 steps away on a quiet street. If this story touches you, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. Settle in, breathe, and let love lead you home. The day I moved back into my mother's old house, the mailbox still had her name on it in fading vinyl letters, and the porch swing creaked as if it remembered more laughter than I could carry. I stood with a cardboard box against my stomach, watching a curtain of dust turn gold in the late afternoon, and told myself I wasn't starting over at 58. I was simply opening a door I'd closed too long ago and letting fresh air in. That's when I saw him, my neighbor, knee-deep in his yard, surrounded by a scatter of terracotta pots and a dog that looked like a shaggy mop with eyes. He raised his hand like we'd known each other for years. No hesitation. No long stare to place me. Just a friendly wave from someone who still believed in front porch hellos. "Welcome back," he called. "Need a hand?" It hit me, how he said welcome back. This was a small Ohio town where stories lasted longer than paint, and I was the mailman's son returning to the block after decades away. The dog, Scout, I later learned, trotted over with the kind of confidence you only see in creatures who trust their world to be kind. She pressed her nose into my knee and sneezed, which I took as a blessing. "I'm Frank," I said, feeling a little like I should tip my cap, though I wasn't wearing one. "Frank Carter." He wiped his hands on his jeans and grinned. "Miguel Rivera. Call me Miguel. And this is Scout. She runs the place." Miguel was a few years younger than me, maybe early 50s, the kind of person who carried himself like a steady beam across a wide room. Dark hair gone salt and pepper at the temples. Laugh lines that had seen honest work. And an easy way of standing that told me he'd always come through when somebody needed a second pair of hands. He lifted the box right out of my arms. "Kitchen?" he asked. It took me a second to say yes. It has always stunned me, in big ways and small, when people are simply good to each other. My mother used to say kindness isn't a grand gesture. It's the extra mile you walk on a Tuesday. We shuffled inside, through the smell of old wood and lemon oil, past the photograph of my father still hanging crooked on the hallway wall. I hadn't been away for lack of love. Life just pulled me to the city, to a career that measured worth in deadlines, to years spent running on a treadmill that faced a window I never once opened. Coming back felt like a confession. I wanted mornings that took their time. I wanted seasons to be more than a backdrop. I wanted to stop pretending that the person inside me was a stranger. We set the box on the counter. Miguel leaned against the sink, looking around as if the house itself could talk. "These older places," he said softly, "they remember. You can feel it. Like a hymn sung quietly." I glanced at him. "You from around here?" "Little bit of everywhere," he said. "Born in New Mexico. My folks brought us up to Ohio when I was a kid. Stayed for work. Stayed because it turned out there's a kind of quiet here that fits me. I teach art over at the high school. Come August, I'll be asking a room full of teenagers to trust themselves with a blank page. It's a yearly miracle." I laughed, already liking the way his voice settled into the room. "And Scout is your assistant?" "Scout is the principal," he said, deadpan. "She writes me up for everything." Scout thumped her tail against the cabinet and took a small circle, approving the house with a polite sniff, then plopped down like we'd been friends forever. We carried more boxes. He made it look easy, like he'd been waiting for something to do with the strength he had to spare. The sun softened, birds swapped places in the trees, and our little street wore an evening sweater. Somewhere a screen door closed, the kind of everyday sound that steadies a heart. When the last box was inside, Miguel set a bright blue cooler on my porch. "There's lemonade in there," he said, "and some tamales my sister dropped off. Please don't try to return the pot clean. I'll just fill it again and we'll be here all night." "Is that a threat or a promise?" I asked. "Both," he said, and smiled. "Welcome back, Frank." When he left, I stood with my hand on the doorframe, feeling the weight of the day shift. It's funny how a good neighbor recalibrates an entire block. The sky's the same, the map is the same, but suddenly every address carries a little light. I didn't sleep much that night. The mattress was new, but the creaks were not, and every familiar old house whisper took another story off the shelf. Around midnight, I wandered to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of that lemonade. It tasted like August. I found the sticky note on the pot of tamales. Heat 5 minutes, eat like you mean it. And I laughed out loud because it sounded like a prayer. I ate one leaning against the counter, and the flavor was so warm and honest it almost felt like someone putting a hand on my shoulder and saying, "It's all right. You're here." Morning came with cardinals and the smell of cut grass. I took my coffee to the porch and sat on the swing. The cup felt perfect in my palm. By the time Scout trotted over, I had already decided the day would be better than the last. Miguel followed, carrying 2 mugs as if the second one had been meant for me all along. He handed me one. "I make extra out of habit," he said. "You'll learn I've got too many habits and most of them turn into casseroles." "I'm not complaining," I said, inhaling the cinnamon he'd dusted on top. We talked across the small stretch of lawn like it had always been a town square. He asked about my work. I told him about 30 years spent in a newsroom where deadlines were Greek gods. I told him I'd come home to write on my own terms and fix up my mother's house in between. He nodded like he knew exactly what it meant to leave something behind, but take the best of it with you. "Honest work," he said. "Takes courage to change." "And you?" I asked. "High school art teacher, king of tamales, liaison to Scout. What else should I know?" He looked out at the street, thinking. "I had a partner," he said. His name was Daniel. We were together a long time. He got sick a few years back. That was hard. Still is in the quiet moments. But the quiet moments are where I talk to him, too. He had this way of leaning against a doorframe like the whole world was a doorway. "I'm sorry," I said. He nodded. "Thank you." Grief's like a creek. It takes the shape of whatever it runs through, and some days it's wild, some days it's barely there, and you can step across. Most days, these days, I can step across. He tilted his head and met my eyes. "And you? What's in your rear view?" I told him the truth. That most of my trying to be someone started with wanting to be a good son and grew into a story where I could never quite say out loud who I was, at least not to myself. I'd spent years being the kind of man who exists for his job and his reputation, until finally on my 55th birthday, I looked at the cake and the candles, and the faces of people who meant well and didn't really know me, and I felt this wave of homesickness for myself. So I started telling the truth, piece by piece, and it wasn't easy, but it was better than the ache. He didn't blink or flinch. He wasn't surprised. He just took a slow sip of coffee and said, "Welcome home," and it was the best use of those words I'd ever heard. Summer rolled on like a song you hum without thinking. We fell into an easy rhythm. I'd see him through the kitchen window watering his sunflowers, and I'd wave with a dish towel. He'd call across the fence to ask if I needed anything from town. We shared recipes that reminded us of our mothers. He taught me how to roast poblano peppers without setting the smoke alarm off. I taught him how to make my mother's biscuit dough so soft it felt like a secret. On Saturdays, the neighborhood felt like family. Someone always had a grill going. The kids down the block sold lemonade for a quarter and wrote IOUs for those of us who never had change. Old Mr. Tanner watered the crack in the sidewalk where a purple flower nobody could name kept pushing its way through. At dusk, porch lights flickered on like stars landing. There's a cadence to a place like this. It slows your pulse. It loosens your jaw. It invites the truth. The first time we sat on his back steps and listened to a ball game on a crackly radio, I realized how badly I'd missed companionship without agenda. Not networking, not impressing. Just the shared appreciation of a good double play and the way cicadas make evening feel like a blessing. Scout took to me immediately, which I didn't take lightly. Animals know. They know who you are when you stop performing. She'd lean her head against my thigh and huff like we'd just told the same joke at the same time. Miguel would scratch her ears and roll his eyes, and I could see the years of loyalty in that dog. Early mornings, late nights, one more walk because she asked in the way good dogs ask. One night, thick with humidity, I found myself telling Miguel about the first boy I ever loved. I never told anyone that story. I was 17, workshopping a future I hadn't dared to name, and he was all the things I didn't yet have a word for. We kissed once under the bleachers after a football game and then never again. He moved away the very next summer. I spent the next 3 decades telling myself it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was a compass. It just took me a lifetime to read it. Miguel listened like it mattered. He didn't try to fix it or make it grand or small. He just let it be the shape it was. When I finished, he nodded and said, "First truth stays with you. It doesn't need to be loud to be real." The storm came at the end of August. Not the worst we'd ever seen, but the kind that pops the power and turns the street into a resting place for branches. I watched the sky go from gray to green to that odd stillness, and then the rain came sideways, drilling the ground. The power snapped off, taking the hum of the refrigerator and the chatter of the radio and leaving us with the thud of our own hearts. Moments later, there was a knock at my door, and Miguel stood there with a flashlight and one of those camp lanterns that makes the whole room feel like a storybook. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm good," I said, and I meant it. Somehow having him there erased the rest. "You?" he grinned. "I have an entire refrigerator of prepared meals like a nervous mother before Thanksgiving. If we don't eat them, I'll be a martyr. Come on." I followed him next door through puddles that smelled like the beginning of fall. He'd lit candles in jars along the counter, and he talked while he cooked as if we were both listening to the same song. He heated up a pot of pozole so fragrant I felt warm to my fingertips. We ate at his small kitchen table, heads leaned in, the world outside loud and distant and somehow safely far away. Scout took her post under the table just in case anything needed her attention. Halfway through the bowl, he set his spoon down and looked at me in that way he had, like his eyes were a porch light. "Can I ask you something?" he said, and it wasn't a question as much as an invitation. "What does home mean to you now?" I considered. The storm rattled the windows. The candles flickered in agreement with our silence. "Home means I don't have to be brave all the time," I said finally. "It means I can be soft without apology. It means knowing the day will offer me something small and honest and I'll see it. Like cardinals and coffee. Like your laugh when Scout barks at the wind. Like biscuits on a Tuesday," he smiled. "That's a good list. You?" I asked. "Home means you don't negotiate your place in the room," he said, voice hardly above the rain. "It's where you put both hands on the counter and say, 'This is mine to love.'" It was simple. It was everything. I felt relief like taking off a heavy coat. We started to clean up once the rain softened. In a brief burst of electricity, on, off like a wink, his kitchen radio tried to catch a station and landed on an old song that made him laugh. "Daniel loved this one," he said. He used to spin me around the kitchen like we were in a movie. Scout would bark like we were breaking a rule. He reached for the dial and then paused. "You dance, Frank?" "Badly," I said. "Perfect," he said, and took my hand. We didn't do much. We just moved a little in the narrow space between the stove and the sink. My palm found his shoulder. His hand rested easy at my waist. It was simple. It was everything. We swayed through a chorus, and the storm receded like it remembered somewhere else it had to be. I felt the flood of an old fear. Not loud, but familiar, like the first ache after a long drive. What would people think? Were we too old to be new at this? But then his thumb brushed a patient line against the side of my hand, and I realized every second I'd spent worrying about other people's opinions was a second I'd never get back. The floor was solid. The moment was ours. The world didn't crack in two. We laughed. We opened the back door to let the damp air in. We checked the block to make sure Mrs. Klein had her candles and Mr. Tanner got down his stairs. We became what neighbors are supposed to be, a net. The power came back after midnight with a wholesome hum. He walked me home, our elbows occasionally bumping, the easy clink of two people letting their guard down. At my door, I turned and said, "Thank you for dinner," he shrugged gently. "Thank you for company. There are nights you carry with you, the way some folks carry a worry stone in their pocket." That was one of them. When I closed the door, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive and curious, as if every framed photograph was leaning in to hear what I might say next. Autumn arrived like a kindness. The maples out front went brave all at once. The air got that crisp taste, and I started sleeping with the window open just enough to hear the world remind itself to rest. We raked leaves in companionable silence. We compared blisters like teenagers. He invited me to the high school's fall art show, and I stood in a hallway that smelled like pencil shavings and gym floors and felt a swell of respect for a person who helped other people find their hands and their courage. I got used to our days having extra. If I baked a pie, I made two. If he grilled chicken, he sent some over in a container with my name on painter's tape. He showed me how to winterize the outside faucet, something my father used to do without telling me how. I showed him how to fix a drafty window with rope caulk and patience. I found myself speaking about my father more freely, and about my mother like she was a person and not a saint, which made my memories kinder and truer. One Saturday, Miguel said, "Come with me to the farmer's market?" It was the last one before they closed for the season, and the vendors were giving people extra celery and too many apples so they wouldn't have to haul them home. We walked the stalls like we'd been doing it for 20 years, arguing pleasantly about the right kind of cheddar for a grilled cheese and stopping to talk to two women who ran the jam table like a comedy duo. As we turned a corner, a woman in a denim jacket called my name. It was my brother's wife, Angie, with a bag of parsnips and that open face people wear when they're not sure what kind of news they're delivering. "Frank," she said, "we've been meaning to stop by. Rick misses you." Rick and I had been cordial these last months. He'd taken longer than I had to let the puzzle of who I was settle into a recognizable picture. I didn't blame him. Families build narratives like houses. Some rooms are finished. Some are dusty. Some you only open when there's no other choice. He'd been quiet but not unkind. I nodded and told Angie they were welcome any time. She hugged me. Miguel said hello, and she looked between us with curiosity and smiled, because she is a light in whatever room she lands in, and walked away. Miguel said nothing for a beat, just continued walking until we reached a table of late tomatoes. Then, in that steady way of his, he said, "Whatever pace you need, I'm in it." "I'm scared I'll have to choose," I said before I could stop myself. "Between honesty and comfort," he asked, "or between different kinds of love?" "Both," I said. "I spent so long choosing comfort. I don't want to leave my brother behind. But I also don't want to take one more step wearing shoes that don't fit." He didn't try to make it tidy. He just nodded. "I get it," he said. "We'll build a bridge. Doesn't have to be all at once." We paid for our tomatoes, but the decision stayed between us like warm bread on a table. Plain, essential, good. When we got home, we made lunch, and Miguel put on a record he kept for days like that. A voice with a little ache in it. A guitar that sounded like a front porch. He held my hand across the table, just a little, just enough. It felt like standing on soft ground and knowing you wouldn't sink. Thanksgiving came with casseroles and folding chairs. My nephew brought a new board game he called Chaotic, and he was right. Miguel's sister, Anna, drove in from Columbus with a trunk full of color and a hug that could fix a week. She brought pastels and plantains and more laughter than could be contained in any room. Rick and Angie came too. Rick stood in the doorway, looking at the spread, the mix of old and new, and cleared his throat the way our father always did when he thought a moment deserved respect. He pulled me aside at one point and looked out the window. The maples were bare by then, the sky pale. "I don't understand everything," he said, straightforward as always. "But I know I love you. I'm working on the learning part. Don't give up on me while I do." I told him I wouldn't. I meant it like a vow. Then he nodded toward the kitchen, where Miguel was laughing at a story Anna told with both hands. "He seems steady," Rick said, as if that quality were a universal currency. "He is," I said. We ate too much and said grace in a way that didn't exclude anyone. We remembered our parents with a toast. After the table was cleared, the house got that contented quiet like a deep breath. I looked around at the people I loved, at my neighbor who had become a central thread in my days, and I felt the kind of gratitude that goes beyond a holiday. It was the relief of not holding yourself together alone. Winter settled in and changed the pace of everything. The neighborhood put out decorations that sagged and sparkled in equal measure. On a night when snow began without announcement, Miguel knocked on my door with 2 knit hats and insisted we walk around the block. We did, posture slightly tilted against the wind, breath visible and human. The streetlights turned the snow into confetti. Scout romped like joy was a job that needed doing. Halfway around, Miguel stopped and looked up, as if listening for a memory. "We used to do this," he said. "Me and Daniel. The world gets quiet in the snow in a way it doesn't any other time. You hear your own feet." "I like it," I said. "I like your stories. I don't feel like I'm competing with them." "You're not," he said. "They're part of the same river." We stood there, two adults in knit hats, and I took his gloved hand because it felt as natural as taking a step. The gloves made it less a spark and more a certainty. That was better to me. At our age, certainty is the spark. In January, he got a call from New Mexico. His mother had fallen and broken her hip. She needed someone to help for a while. He told me at my kitchen table, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. "I'll go," he said. "A month, maybe 2. Anna will check on Scout. You can too. She likes your backyard because you talk to her while she's doing her business. She pretends not to understand." "I'll talk to her in full sentences," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and failing a little. He reached for my hand. "We'll call. We'll send letters if the calls don't feel enough. This isn't an ending. It's a bend. Go," I said. "Your mother is lucky to have you." We made a list of tasks like people do when they don't want to talk about feelings, and then we talked about feelings anyway. On the day he left, the sky was bright and deceptive. He loaded his trunk and checked 3 times to make sure he had his charger. I handed him a bag with my mother's old prayer card tucked under a stack of homemade cookies, because even if you don't pray, it's good to let something older than you ride along. He hugged me. It wasn't a quick, polite thing. It was the chest-to-chest kind that tells the truth. "You take care," he said. "I will," I said. "Come back to me." He nodded like he had no doubts. "I will." The street was both the same and emptied when he drove away. That afternoon, I sat with Scout on my porch and told her how bad I am at goodbyes. She looked at me with her earnest eyebrows and rested her head on my knee. We watched the mail truck going house to house. We listened to the rhythm of a normal day, and I felt the ache of missing someone who hadn't been gone long enough to justify it. Love is not fair. It does not check for appropriate timelines. I became a creature of habit. I shoveled both our sidewalks. I kept the bird feeder full. I left the porch light on a little longer than necessary. At night, I wrote. The words came easier than they had in years, as if some familiar hand had knocked at the door and finally been invited in. I wrote about my father's hands and my mother's voice, and the small good moments that carry a life. I wrote about a neighbor whose steadiness gave me a place to set my own softness down. It was not a diary. It was a declaration. Miguel called when he could. The time difference felt like another hill to climb, but it was a small one. He described the desert air and the way his mother saved every plastic grocery bag like they were gold. He told me she liked my cookies and made a big fuss, and we laughed because some praise you never stop craving even when you're grown. At night, when the line got quiet, we just breathed together for a minute and said goodnight the way people say it when it still feels like a marvel. He wrote letters, too. One was just a list of things he knew for sure. The smell of rain in the desert is clean like a promise. Scout's left ear sticks out a little more than her right when she's thinking. The students at his school would still surprise him in the spring. And he had fallen in love with me in the slowest, surest way, and he hoped that did not frighten me. I read that letter 6 times before bed and another 2 in the morning. I sat on my porch with the winter sun leaning in and tried to memorize the feeling of being known. It didn't scare me. It relieved me. It smoothed a corner that had always been sharp. I wrote back, longhand, the way my mother taught me. I told him that love felt like weeding a garden together. You don't rush it, you show up, you let seasons teach you, and you make something you're both proud to bring to the table. I told him I loved him too. I didn't use the word lightly, and yet it came with ease, like a familiar song on the radio you didn't know you'd been waiting for. His mother got better. Slowly. He stayed 5 weeks. When he pulled back onto our street, it was a kind of spring in my chest even though the trees were still bare. He climbed out of the car, and I walked out without my coat like a fool, and we met halfway, Scout dancing circles like a child at a birthday party. He hugged me and didn't let go. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. We stood there until it felt ridiculous to stand in the middle of the street, and then we went inside. He set his bag down. He looked taller to me. Or maybe it was my relief changing the math of it. "How's your mother?" I asked. "Good," he said, stubborn, which frankly is a relief. I left her with more soup than any one person should have. We cooked dinner together using too many cutting boards, ending up in close quarters that made every bump and brush feel like a secret handshake. After we ate, we sat on the couch and watched the windows darken and did not fill the air with more than it needed. When he put his hand on mine, it was like reaching a porch after a long walk. Spring brought a kind of clarity. The neighborhood emerged from its sweaters. The kids on bikes started to ride in wide, joyful loops. Somebody hung a tire swing from the maple in the corner lot, and the creak of it became the sound of afternoons. Miguel planted tomatoes with seriousness and hope. I built a simple wooden bench between our yards, not quite on either property, and when he saw it, he laughed and shook his head. "You old softy," he said. "Guilty," I said. I wanted something that belonged to both of us. We sat on that bench in the mornings, coffee steaming, and talked about everything and nothing. It was our altar. Not fancy, solid. That's where we were when my brother came by on a Saturday with 2 cups from the donut shop. He stood on the sidewalk looking a little uncertain, as if he needed an invitation just to be safe. I waved him over and moved my jacket so he could sit. He did carefully, his coffee the peace offering he had always understood best. "This your bench?" he asked. "Ours," I said, nodding toward Miguel. Rick nodded back. "Good. Looks right here." No speech was made. No pronouncement was necessary. We sat, the 3 of us, taking the measure of the day. Rick asked Miguel about his students. Miguel asked Rick about boats, because my brother has always loved water even if he only ever sees it once a year. They talked like men do when they are learning each other without wanting to admit they are learning each other. It was enough. It was where we were. That mattered. Most evenings that spring ended on the bench. The sky grew generous as the days got longer. We took Scout for slow walks. We learned how to move around each other in the kitchen like people who had practiced. And we started thinking about what we wanted to do with the summer. "Road trip," Miguel said one night, a kid in his voice. "Nothing dramatic. Just a drive to the lake. Little places with pie, towns that sell postcards nobody buys." We planned it like people who finally had time. 2 days in Marblehead to watch the lighthouse. A stop in a small diner with a neon sign that had hummed for 50 years. We made a playlist that mixed our favorites and the songs we'd adopted from each other. On the way home from one of those drives, we stopped at a nursery and bought a tiny tree. Dogwood, with the kind of blossom that looks like it might sing. We could plant it between the yards, I said. "Let it grow into itself." "Good," he said. "Let's give it a place to belong." We dug the hole together. The ground cooperated. We tamped the soil with our palms and watered the base like it was a new mothership. When it was standing, small and brave, we stepped back. There's something about putting a living thing into the earth that straightens your spine and quiets your worry. It's a kind of promise absolute in its simplicity. I will show up for you. On a night in early June, when the sky didn't want to go to bed, we sat on the back steps listening to the radio, and I turned to him and said, "I want you to have a key." He understood at once. Not dramatic, not a ceremony. Just the truth turned into metal. He took the key and closed his fingers around it and rested his fist against his chest briefly, like he was telling his heart the news. Then he pulled a key from his own pocket and handed it to me. Not because he'd planned it, but because good men are ready to meet you halfway. He looked at me in that steady way. "I love you, Frank. I love you too," I said. In the slow, sure way. "In the growing things between 2 yards way?" He laughed softly. "That's the best way." We kissed then, gentle and deliberate, a thing we'd been moving toward with patience. It wasn't the fireworks kind. It was the right key finally turning the lock. It was trust made physical. It was new and familiar at once. We didn't rush. We didn't need to. We stood and swayed a little. Scout nosed our knees, a chaperone seeing us off to the dance floor. The radio played something soft. The air was more than kind. The summer became a collection of small jewels. A morning we woke early to watch the sunrise over the lake, and he tucked a blanket around my shoulders like a thing he had always done. An afternoon we spent painting my mother's old bedroom, and we found her shopping list tucked behind a baseboard and read it aloud like a poem. A night we honored Daniel on his birthday with a toast and a story and a song. and I watched Miguel's face grow soft and knew that part of love is making room for every person the person you love has loved. A block party in July turned the street into a table. We carried out dishes and folding chairs and extension cords, and someone rigged a set of lights that made everything look cinematic. I watched Miguel carry a crock-pot of beans like a baby, and I thought about all the ways a man can be steady. When the music started, a neighbor I barely knew grabbed my hand and told me I was glowing. I laughed it off. Later, Miguel and I danced near the curb, not a performance, just a sway. A few people looked, and then they didn't because they were living their own summers. It mattered and it didn't. That was the point. That was the gift of a place where people mean well, even when they're learning how to show it. When the first cool night came, we took out sweaters and sat on our bench. The dogwood had outgrown its fragility. It rustled in a new voice. We watched a flock of geese argue about direction and wondered how they always sorted it out. We talked about the school year coming and my book inching toward being finished, and the small trip we wanted to take in the fall to a cabin with a porch where we'd read in companionable silence. Miguel rested his head on my shoulder. "You remember the first night I saw you?" he asked. "You mean when I was sweating and carrying a box and looking like someone who'd taken a wrong turn?" I asked. "No," he said, laughter in his breath. "I mean the way you looked at your mother's house like you were apologizing to it and promising it something in the same glance." I thought, there's a man who knows what his hands are for. "What are they for?" I asked, teasing just a little. He squeezed my fingers. "Holding things you don't want to drop." We sat with that in the quiet. We watched the porch lights come on. The neighborhood settled into itself. It's a beautiful thing to be a part of a place on purpose. To know the rhythm and play your note, I think about time differently now. Not as a ladder to climb, but as a porch to sit on with the evening right there and the day you're in being enough. I don't need every story to be epic. I need them to be true. I need them to be ours. For my birthday, Miguel made a cake the way my mother did. Yellow with chocolate frosting and too many candles because he said an abundance of light never hurt anyone. We invited the block. We sang off-key. Rick told a story about me that was not entirely flattering. I told one about him that brought the balance, and we both ended up wiping our eyes while pretending it was because of the wind. When it was over, and the chairs were stacked and the cake divided into containers for lunches, I stood on the sidewalk with Miguel and looked up at the dogwood. The leaves were turning just a little at the edges. The bench held a warmth I could feel even from a step away. "This is home," I said. "It is," he said. If you asked me what changed me most, I wouldn't point to a single day or a single kiss or even the moment I said I loved him and meant it with both feet on the ground. I'd point to the accumulation of gentle. The cup of coffee waited for on the porch rail. The way he remembers my mother's birthday and sets a flower by her picture. The way we both look out for the teenagers down the block because the world needs all the adults with soft eyes it can get. The way we plant bulbs, knowing we might not be the ones to see all of them bloom, but we plant anyway because someone we love will. I still walk past the mailbox with my mother's name half visible, and some days I leave it there on purpose, because we are made of layers and the past is not a stain but a map. On other days, I think about replacing it with both of our names. Not because we need to announce anything, but because a mailbox is a handshake on a house. And sometimes it's good to let the world know who you are. Scout still rules the place with benevolence. She has her favorite spot under the dogwood. She knows when one of us needs to walk and when one of us needs to sit. She's a creature of ritual and affection and will likely live forever out of sheer stubbornness. The other day, I was sitting on the bench alone when a young man walked by, new to the neighborhood, headphones on, eyes on his shoes. He glanced up, startled to find me watching, and I smiled and gave a little wave like Miguel had done to me that first afternoon. He hesitated, then waved back, then took his headphones off. "Nice tree," he said. "Thank you," I said. "We planted it last year. It's ours." He nodded, like that word meant something particular to him, and for a second, I thought I saw my 17-year-old self in his posture. The carefulness, the hope, folded small. "Welcome to the block," I said. "If you need a cup of sugar or just a place to sit for a minute, we're here." He smiled. "Thanks," he said. "Might take you up on that." After he walked away, Miguel came out with 2 mugs and set one in front of me. He followed my gaze to the corner where the young man had turned. "He remind you of you?" he asked. "A little," I said. "A little of all of us, maybe." Miguel sat. He bumped his knee against mine. "Then it's a good thing you waved, neighbors." It's such a plain word. It can mean an obligation you meet so you can be left alone. Or it can mean the courage to be seen buying your morning paper with your hair doing its own thing. It can be the borrowed ladder, the delivered casserole, the broom on your porch because someone noticed yours was missing. For me, it became another word for love. Not the grand stage kind, but the kind that makes room for your whole life. The kind that doesn't mind if you're slow sometimes. The kind that doesn't measure performance. The kind that knows the best lives are quilted together out of Tuesday afternoons. In the end, all the big moments. First time his hand found mine, first time we danced, first time I said, "Come back to me," and he did, were good because of the days around them. The days where I looked across a small stretch of grass and saw a man who made the world kinder. The days where I understood that vulnerable is not a word for weakness, but a word for you can set your bag down here. I'm not sorry it took me this long. I'm not guilty about years spent doing what I thought I had to do. Compassion reaches both forward and back. It says you did your best then, and you are doing your best now, and both things are worthy of gentleness. We keep the bench clean. We keep the tree watered. We take turns making coffee. We say good morning with full sentences because there is no reason to rush the best part of the day. We take walks after dinner and let the mosquitoes take their tax while we trade stories about students and sentences that don't behave. We store each other's keys in the dish by the door, so there is always a place to return them. So there is always a place to come home to. On certain nights, when the sky goes pink and gold and the air holds the heat like a lullaby, we put on that old song again and he takes my hand. And the kitchen floor becomes proof that love can be both simple and vast. If you ask me to define it, I would say love is the feeling of being met where you live. It is the presence at your fence, the wave that starts before you even look up, the voice that says welcome back without needing to ask where you've been. So, yes, my neighbor. The man with soil under his nails and patience in his bones. The man who taught the kids at school to be brave with a brush and taught me to be brave with my life. The man who turned my porch into a whole new place. Not by changing the view, but by standing in it with me. The man who helped me plant a tree that will outlive our arguments and our best jokes and will keep blooming year after year as if to say, this is what happens when you tend to what matters. The bench doesn't care whose hip creaked when we sat down. The tree doesn't mind that our hands have held a lot of different things. The porch light clicks on whether we are early or late. And the night, patient as a good neighbor, waits for us to step out and take stock of what we have built together. A life, not loud, but true. A love, not public in a shout-it way, but present in the reach and the return. A home, not a structure on a map, but a place where two lives intersect in such a way that the line becomes a bond. Every evening, when I see him across our shared fence with 2 coffee mugs and that quiet, steady smile, I feel the easiest kind of faith. Not in miracles, although there have been a few, but in the daily practice of showing up. He is my neighbor. He is my love. He is the simple whole sentence at the end of a long, complicated paragraph. And in this small corner of the world beneath the dogwood with its tireless bloom, that is more than enough.